Hi, and so BlizzCon is here and the announcements for the next World of Warcraft expansion are here. And some things that are not a surprise at all. There were, of course, a number of things leaked, so we sort of knew a few things. We knew Kul Tiras was going to be in it. We knew about the sub-races. But we didn't know anything else. Blizzard are always quite good at keeping their cards close to their chest. The title of the new expansion is going to be Battle for Azeroth, and it's very, very faction against faction based. Now, the first part of that didn't really take me by surprise. There was something released purely for people who physically went to BlizzCon. They got in their goodie bag a prologue for the new novel Before the Storm, which, remember, takes place immediately after the events of Antorus. In it, and you can see for yourself on Wowhead's site, and remember, this video is spoiler, so this, anything goes in this video, bear in mind. But it basically describes Sylvanas in it and as wanting to attack Stormwind. They were trying to explain at BlizzCon, because the cinematic shows an attack on Lordaeron by the Alliance, which sounds strange because the Lordaeron sort of was the Alliance, but now really is Horde stroke neutral, certainly the Undercity's Horde, which is the capital of Lordaeron. So Alliance effectively attacking Lordaeron. What's the reason for this? There's also going to be an event, which we don't know a lot about it as yet, as the Horde burning Teldrassil. That is going to be very interesting in drawing in the Night Elves. Tyrande and Malfurion, maybe they're going to have a very prominent role in it. Maybe they're going to be largely away dealing with that devastation. And the question was asked, well, who started it? Did the Alliance attack Lordaeron first? Did the Horde burn the World Tree first? I'm sort of thinking the Horde first, because ultimately this prologue does very clearly describe Sylvanas long before this new expansion wanting to attack the Alliance, wanting to actively go to war with the Alliance. Now, we start off on Lordaeron. That's where it's going to, because they said that just like with Legion, we're going to start off immediately following the events of the cinematic. The same is there, and this is very much a battle on Lordaeron. Superb cinematic, by the way. They get better every time, every single time. There were most of the races on both Horde and Alliance in the cinematic as well. Obviously, there were no gnomes. That's ridiculous. It continues to be ridiculous. It doesn't matter how good the technology gets. You cannot make a good cinematic with gnomes. Sorry. But one big bit of news before I do a quick rundown of the new features that come with the new expansion is legacy servers. Vanilla servers. Vanilla WoW servers are going to be a thing. They haven't as yet mentioned any great details of it, and I'll do a separate video after they have. But for me, what would make the most sense with this, obviously it's going to have to be a separate thing on the Battle.net. You can't just make it as a different realm choice in the current game, because there's so many things that wouldn't work. Your add-ons wouldn't work. You'd have to keep disabling them, and the WoW store couldn't work or anything like that. It's got to be a separate game. But for my money, because you think to yourself, why are they doing this? Is it just to make some more money because people want it? Or is it to crush the private servers, which is what I think it is, right? Think about it this way. What they did, gold sellers and private servers has been a bit of thorn in their side throughout the time. Gold sellers, they did all sorts of things to try and stamp it out. Ultimately, what they did that mostly killed them off, certainly massively reduced them, was that they came up with an idea for us to buy gold, the WoW token. This could well be another way to get people to stop playing private servers. It's only going to work if it's basically free. So what I am expecting is it's essentially a free-to-play game as a separate thing, WoW servers, so no one has a reason to play on those private servers. That is, for my money, what it would be. At the most, what they could possibly do is charge a very nominal subscription fee, which would be included if you had a World of Warcraft subscription, so you don't have to pay anything extra. But I think it makes more sense in terms of what their aims may be for this, to just make it free. So on to Battle for Azeroth then. BFA. BFA is the shortened version of the next expansion. And very faction based, as I said. 3 leveling zones. When you finish on Lordaeron, you're basically going to go to Kul Tiras. We knew about that. Kul Tiras is really part of the Alliance. And going to go to Zandalar. So it's 2 significantly sized islands, continents as they're described, each of which has 3 zones. So we're only getting 3 leveling zones because the Horde level on Zandalar, entirely on Zandalar. The Alliance effectively entirely on Kul Tiras. The idea on these zones is we're doing things for the people we wish as our allies. On Kul Tiras, yes, that is going to involve mugging pirates. But everything is very, very separate for Alliance and Horde. So there's no common leveling zones. So in terms of the zones they've made, in theory it sounds like more, because you've got 6 leveling zones. But for an individual player, you've got 3. So I'm not sure what I think about that yet. I mean, I wasn't particularly happy at 4 for Legion, but in the end it sort of worked out. There were plenty of quests. It was okay. Maybe the same thing will happen here. Now, of course, as I said, the Kul Tiras are already technically part of the Alliance. They're, you know, we're very pally with them. The Zandalari are not part of the Horde. It remains to be seen whether the purpose of the Horde going to Zandalar is to get the Zandalari trolls to join the Horde, or whether they have some other reason for going there. Maybe they join with some of them. There are dungeons, for example, that involve attacking what appears to be Zandalari trolls. Again, no firm details at this point. As there are more details, I will, of course, follow with more focused vlogs as well. So, yes, we've got allied races, is what they call them. We were talking about them as sub-races before because we saw the data mined information, and that was totally accurate, by the way. So there's Lightforged Draenei, you've got High Mountain Tauren, you've got Nightborn, you've got Void Elves. In addition, we've also got Dark Iron Dwarves, and we've got Zandalar Trolls for the Horde, suggesting that in actual fact that they will be sort of joining the Horde. The Zandalar Trolls are distinct from the Darkspear Trolls in that they can stand upright. They sort of have to. I said this before. We saw a picture of the king of the Zandalari, this massive ornate hat, and I was thinking if they were to try and stoop down, they'd probably break their neck. Now, in terms of how they're shared across the factions, the Horde get the High Mountain Tauren, they get the Zandalar Trolls, and they get the Nightborn. On the other side, the Alliance get the Dark Iron Dwarves, they get the Void Elves, and they get the Lightforged Draenei. Now, when you create a character as one of these sort of new races, for which they said they get new racials, but there's no details on that yet, you start off at level 20. So the argument goes that, when you're starting off one of these races, you already know what you're doing. You don't need to start off at level 1. We're going to start you off at level 20, which is a really odd thing. But anyway, when you get to level 110, what they'd said is that sort of unlocks a cosmetic skin that you can use elsewhere. But there's different people have watched the same presentation and are reading different things into that. So I'm not really going to say any more about that until we have got more details exactly how that works. There is a new artifact. It's not going to be a weapon. We're going to get rid of our artifact weapons in an event. But we are going to get a new artifact because, again, artifact power, again, it does what they wanted it to do in Legion. They've improved the system. They've refined the system. They've still got areas for improvement. But hopefully we'll see those in Battle for Azeroth. But this is going to be a neck. So it's going to be an artifact neck. It doesn't work quite. It's not going to be a complete substitute for the artifact weapon. We're going to have a situation where it doesn't have the huge trait tree that we had on the artifact weapon. But what it does do is it has some customization that allows you to empower 3 types of armor. They said they have in mind at the moment 3 armor slots for this. So it can empower the armor that you've got in those slots. Again, details at the moment not very forthcoming. We may find even at the end of BlizzCon, I'll say this, I've said this before, that we have more questions than answers. So until we actually get into the alpha and beta and start testing this out for ourselves, we may not find a huge amount, but we're certainly not getting details right on the first presentation. Vol'jin's story is going to continue, and Thrall is going to get more prominence in this one as well. Now, my idea on this one potentially is that Thrall is sort of taking Vol'jin's ashes to Zandalar because there's a lot of raising of the dead going on. It has some interesting storyline things here. Now, this is me reading into it. They've not said anything about this. Maybe Thrall is taking it back there on some pilgrimage there. But I'm also thinking in terms of Sylvanas. Now, what did Sylvanas try to do in Legion? She went to Stormheim to try and get more Valkyr, again so that she can perpetuate the Forsaken. Now, that didn't work out. She still wants to be able to sort of keep the Forsaken going forever, even though if you read that prologue about the Before the Storm, not necessarily all the Forsaken want that for themselves, but certainly Sylvanas does. And then you think to yourself, so you've got this group of Zandalar, and they showed various undead, including undead dinosaurs, which is really cool. And you think to yourself, well, that's the sort of thing Sylvanas would be interested in. So maybe there's the initial link in terms of why the Horde would go to Zandalar. Maybe Sylvanas, found out about their activities then, thinking this may be of interest to me personally. So that might open up an interesting storyline there. There's going to be, in terms of the faction versus faction thing, I've always sort of said faction versus faction doesn't really work for PvE because we all have the content that has common enemies. So dungeons, for example, we have to be fighting against a common enemy. Raids, we have to fight against a common enemy. Otherwise, you have to make separate raids and dungeons for each faction. Now, although whilst we're leveling up, only the Alliance will get to do the Kul Tiras dungeons and only the Horde will get to do the Zandalar dungeons, they all become, for everyone, at level cap. So again, they will be common enemies to both Alliance and Horde. Now, what they're going to do to push this faction versus faction thing is, it seems to me, there's a few things, but one of the most interesting is some procedurally generated content in terms of exploring islands. The idea is you go off to islands to find what's called Azonite. Now, what Azonite is it's, I suppose, primordial globs of power from Azeroth herself, bubbling to the surface in various parts of Azeroth. And we need this to empower our neck. I think that what this is supposed to be is the new artifact power, basically. And we go to these islands to do this. Now, the idea is, there's obviously only so many islands, but each time you go to an island, it could be very different from the last time you went there. Because there'll be different things there. There'll be some friendly groups that you need to help out in order to establish a base there. There are hostile ones as well. And you're going to be up against the opposite faction, but not players. It's going to be opposite faction NPC, so it's totally PvE. Suits me down to the ground. But they are said to have a very advanced AI. In other words, they will act strategically. Now that, if it were, obviously at BlizzCon, they always talk very aspirationally about things. They always talk about the things the way things are intended. It doesn't always work out that way, but obviously they're going to be setting a lot of store by this. This, you can imagine, is the really big content for this expansion. It sounds to me like, although Mythic Plus Dungeons are a huge success story in Legion, and obviously they're going to improve those and go with those in the next one, but what Mythic Plus Dungeons were to Legion, it sounds like they want this island exploration thing to be for Battle for Azeroth. So it's the sort of thing they're obviously putting a lot into it, and they really think that's going to work. Now, speaking of PvP as well, because a lot of people were looking at this and thinking, this all sounds like they're going to completely rework PvP. And in a way they did. Now, I was worried about this because I like PvP when it's done well in an expansion. I won't go into details now about what that means for me. But yeah, I was a little apprehensive because I don't think Blizzard have ever done it right in World of Warcraft. And I had no confidence they suddenly would now. My big gripe always is about going out into the world, just wanting to quest and getting ganked by people. Now, when I do it on my Paladin, most of the time it ends up with the other person dead, not me, because, you know, I've got pretty good gear. I don't really know what I'm doing in PvP, but I've got such good gear I don't really have to, because it's amazing how many people will attack me with such poor gear. And people will keep saying me, whenever I moan about this, they'll keep saying, well, why are you playing on a PvP realm? And the answer is simple, because I joined a guild that was on a PvP realm. The vast majority of raiding guilds are on PvP realms. For whatever reason, maybe a sociologist could investigate that one. I don't know. But the fact is that PvE realms are largely dead. And, you know, there's maybe one alliance and one horde PvE realm in the whole of the EU that has a significant number of decent raiding guilds. And whenever I've been looking for a guild at those times, they've not been recruiting. So I've gone to, you know, where there are, and it's always PvP realms. But I don't go there because I want to do so-called world PvP. Blizzard have come up with something that I like very much. And they acknowledge this system. You may find yourself on a PvP realm simply because that's the realm where your friends are playing or where the guild you've chosen to join is playing, but you are not into the PvP features of a PvP realm. They're going to give you the option of individually opting in or out of that. So I get to say, do you know what? I'm a PvE player. And the whole place will behave as if I'm on a PvE realm. I'll effectively be on a PvE realm as far as I understand it, but I still get to be in my guild. And other people in my guild who say, no, I like that aspect of the game, the PvP world stuff, so I'm going to be elected to be a PvP realm player. It's all individual, so it doesn't affect you which realm you go on, which guild you join. That's your individual choice. It's not a choice made for you by deciding to join that guild. That sounds fantastic to me. I'm absolutely loving that. There are going to be incentives, though, because you might argue it this way. Why would anyone do that? Because even on a PvE realm, you can elect to flag yourself as PvP and then just, you know, see if someone else wants to do the same. There are going to be extra like PvP content, not just as new arenas, new battleground, all the rest of it, but they're going to have, they talked about like bounty hunter missions, stuff like that, to encourage you to go into enemy cities. There'll be a high value target there that will give some reward. That sounds like a good idea. Also, Warfronts. So as I say, there's going to be a new battleground based on Silithus, which actually is also going to be coming sooner than you might think. There's going to be a trial version of it coming in Legion, so we're not even having to wait till the next expansion. In fact, it's going to be coming quite soon. But Warfronts, this is a 12-player co-op, again, versus, let's faction v faction, but it's sort of, again, NPCs, the opposite faction are NPCs. Now, the idea of this is linked back to the Warcraft RTSs. So the idea was pitched as, you know, what do you do in these RTSs? You consolidate an area, you build structures, you build an army, and then you go and attack. And that's what this is going to be, this 20-player Warfront. So it's all about building up an area, researching upgrades. You all have to agree on what buildings you're going to make. So there's presumably some voting process goes in there. And then you, when you've got your everything ready, you go out and attack the opposite faction, which are NPCs. So that's the sort of thing you can get into as a PvE guild. Quite how that's going to put pressure on you as a raiding guild or not, because 20-player scenarios, I mean, this is a significant proportion of your roster would be taking part in this if you did it as a guild. Obviously, presumably there'll be pug versions of this as well. You can just do in, whether there's an automatic sign-up like Battlegrounds or whether you just have to make your own pre-made like Mythic Plus Dungeons is not clear at this point. And the final thing, which I'm sort of excited about, although they haven't gone as far with it as I would like, in that there's going to be proper zone scale. Well, I say proper zone scaling. All the zones in World of Warcraft are going to scale. They're not going to scale all the way. What I would have liked is to see all the previous expansions scale all the way up to level 100. In other words, all previous expansion zones scale all the way up to the previous expansion's level cap. That's what I would like. That's not what's coming. What's coming is they will scale, but over narrower ranges. So a couple of examples. Westfall, which you'd normally go to at level 10. I think he said something like that might scale from, say, level 10 to 30. Now, what's the benefit of this? Well, the problem without scaling at the moment is if you're leveling up, especially in those earlier levels now, you can be going around doing quests, and especially if you've got heirloom armor, but even if you haven't, and you're doing the quest, eventually you are finding that the mobs are like green quality, not giving much experience. When you hand in the quest, it's not giving that much experience. So your rate of leveling goes down. So what do? You abandon all those quests and go to the next zone. That's a bit annoying. It's quite disjointed from the storytelling point of view. Whereas if they scale, you just stay where you are. It's especially a problem if you mix signing up for dungeons with questing. Because you know how it is, you sign up for a dungeon, you go into the dungeon, you can go up a couple of levels in a dungeon with all the quests and everything, a level or two. You come back and it's like, well, all those quests you were doing are worthless now. So you have to just abandon them and go somewhere else. Now you can come back and they may not be. But they didn't want it as levelling as I would, because as they said, like, let's say you just made a Forsaken level 1 in Tirisfal Glades. They don't want you to just be able to go wandering into the Eastern Plague or to the Plaguelands. So you are going to get mugged by that bear if you do that. But there is another interesting fact to this as well. So I know when I've talked about this in the past and people have sort of said to me, no, I wouldn't like, you know, some people have actually said they wouldn't like what I would want. They would want it along expansion lines. It's not quite that either, because there's going to be a bit of choice. They specifically said, for example, that all the Burning Crusade zones and all the Wrath of the Lich King zones are going to scale from 60 to 80. So in other words, what you can do is when you get to level 60, you finish with the vanilla content, you can choose just to go to Northrend to begin with. Now, whether you'll be able to level all the way up to 80 just doing Northrend content, I mean, you probably could, especially with heirloom gear. But, you know, you certainly have that choice. But even if you didn't, you know, you could do all the quests you want to do there, and then you could go to the Burning Crusades ones, or in either order. Doesn't matter. When you're leveling from 60 to 80, you choose between Burning Crusade and Wrath content. And then presumably there's similar things later on. But they didn't go into all the details about all the expansions leveling. So that's the thing there. And that's the announcement so far in terms of what we know. There are other panels coming up. There's one quite soon here as well. What I'm going to do, I'm not going to do a separate video after every individual panel. I'm now going to wait for BlizzCon to effectively be done. So the same time tomorrow roundabout, then that should be the case. I'm then going to do another vlog with some of the more details, with my own commentary added in, of course. But in terms of an overview of what is coming, that is it. Comments down below as usual. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, especially subscribe for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later and enjoy the rest of BlizzCon.